All right, so I write you. This pick got a lot of pickup. I'm sure you saw as well.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I want to do an interview.
Yeah.
But I don't want to do an interview. I want to make sure the audience understands up front. This is not going to be me. I want you to answer and give your views. I would say you represent probably about half the country, your views, and the other half represents mine. You agree? We're kind of divided.
Plus or minus, certainly divided. Yeah. No question. I mean, we're polarized, we're traumatized. We clearly are in these, and we're in these echo chambers. I mean, let's be candid, Sean. I mean, your folks are watching you and getting a certain perspective, and my folks are watching other networks getting a certain perspective
we
as
have
well.
Studies that show a lot of Democrats watch me.
Well, including me. So I'm here for a reason. To wit the point, though, I think we need more of that cross-pollination. We need more of these kind of conversations, and we need to not just accuse each other of misleading the American people, but I think confront each other in the context.
Okay, I'm going to start off, and I apologize to all the listeners and followers. I'm not turning into a Democrat just because I said good things about RFK, and I'm about to agree with Gavin Newsom on something. So, big disclaimer. I do agree we do need more sit-downs and conversations across party lines, actual conversations, not 2-minute Fox News clips of let's all get into panels and yell at each other for 2 minutes and then go to commercial break. I don't think it's a bad idea. More people need to sit down and have full length conversations where they actually present their arguments. Maybe they agree, maybe they disagree. I think maybe he's just saying that. I don't think, kudos to him for actually showing up to Hannity and doing this, but I do agree with him on that point. And that, well, excuse me, I just threw up a little bit in my mouth that I said I agree with Newsom on something. So any thoughts about people sitting down, talking to each other? Is that a good thing?
No, absolutely. It's a good thing because we should have all learned to be civil and understand that we don't all agree on everything. And that doesn't it's not a good reason to start yelling at somebody.
Yeah.
And it's not going to accomplish anything if everyone's just yelling at everybody. No one ever is going to be able to move forward and get anything done.
Absolutely.
Of providing opportunities to address some of the facts that are often omitted in terms of the conversations and topics we choose to pick up.
So what I see is, I don't know how you reconcile some of these differences. Now, you either believe in secure borders and law and order, and people that would want to come into our country have to do it legally. I'm the product of that.
Right.
Or there are people that want open borders. You believe in defund, dismantle, no bail laws like cities like in New York, where the show originates from, or you believe law and order, safety, security.
I also want to point out they are sitting in the governor's mansion in Sacramento. Gavin Newsom and his family do not live in the governor's mansion, which is housing provided for the governor. He thought it was beneath him when he was elected, so he and his family bought a $4 million house in cash out in one of the most expensive suburbs of Sacramento, 45 minutes away. So they don't actually live at the governor's mansion. If to give you an idea of how elitist Gavin Newsom is about.
So he's going to let homeless people live there, right?
He should. No one's living there, so I don't know what he does. Does he have an office there? I don't know. I thought the governor's office was like in the Capitol building or something, but yeah, no one lives there. So while they are sitting there, they should have had it at his $4 million house. That probably would have been really nice. Talk about all the carbon emissions for 45 minutes back and forth that he has to truck his family in. And, if Jennifer, the first partner, doesn't go with him, it's another car. And how many cars back and forth between his mansion and Sacramento? Just a thought.
A prerequisite for the pursuit of happiness. You want energy independence, or you don't want any domestic energy production. I mean, how do you reconcile?
Well, I don't see those binaries at all. Quite the
You don't
contrary.
see it at all?
No, I don't. I mean, I want border security. Democrats want border security. We also want
But you don't want any walls.
I want comprehensive immigration reform. I want to actually address the issue more comprehensively, just like Ronald Reagan did in 1989. And with respect, Sean, you promoted yourself with the Gang of Eight and bipartisan legislation that got 68 votes in the Senate, only to die in the House, that could fundamentally address this issue, which is the issue. So I don't see those.
But I always
binaries.
had as my position, build the wall first.
Amnesty. That's what he's talking about. He wants Ronald Reagan style amnesty. And I think the Gang of Eight also had a clause for amnesty as well. So that's what Gavin Newsom believes in, is he wants amnesty.
You're against building any wall.
I know. I have no problem with the 650 plus miles we have on border walls. I come from a state with the largest, San Isidro is the largest land port in the Western Hemisphere. I don't need to be educated on the issue of the border or issues of.
You've heard it here first. Gavin Newsom, pro wall. Just so we're all on the same page. San Isidro, which is 20 minutes just south of where I am. We cross it pretty frequently. It's pretty incredible. A lot of cars go back and forth across San Isidro. So, and there are big walls down there. But you heard it here first. Gavin Newsom is pro wall on his border.
Issues of immigration policy.
Well,
One
look,
thing.
Medi-Cal for illegals is $2.7 billion to the state.
And how many billions are we spending for uncompensated care? People end up in the emergency.
Can I ask you,
on the back end, wasting taxpayer money.
why is it wrong to just demand, if you want to come to this country, obey our laws, respect our borders, respect our sovereignty, apply, come in, and we can expedite the application
It's
process.
the latter part. Now you're having a conversation. This is where I think the vast majority of America
That's
is.
why I'm here.
Well, that's the point.
I'm here to
And that
bring us together.
And that was the point of the comprehensive reform. Where's Congress? Look, you can criticize Biden all the time. Biden's border crisis. I watch 24/7 surround sound anger machine around that. I get it.
Wait a minute. In 3 years,
I get it.
he will allow over 7.5 million people illegally into this country. Right. You have to see there's something wrong with that.
No, I do. And I see there's something right with what he's done post Title 42, a 70% reduction, taking a lot of the core tenets that the previous administration used. He's now being sued by the left, not just being applauded, certainly by the right. That said, here's what's missing. The conversation you just suggested we should be having around dealing with asylum seekers and backlogs and updating and modernizing our visas and addressing a pathway that Ronald Reagan himself acknowledged.
Let me ask you if
and
you
I think
support
those
this.
things are missing.
Should we have background checks?
Yes.
Should, in the middle of a pandemic, health checks?
We did.
Should we have means testing so the people that enter this country are not going to be a financial burden on the American people?
We prioritize already with certain, we prioritize with STEM, we prioritize with visas already.
Okay, so we have Gavin Newsom supports the wall on his border. He also supports the core tenets of the Trump legal immigration policies from before. So he supports that, and he supports background checks. And what else did he sounds pretty Republican on a lot of these issues for someone who's from California, right?
Yes, but I also feel like he just keeps trying to throw it in Hannity's face. Like he just keeps bringing up Ronald Reagan to be like level with him, like, your governor, Republican governor, Ronald Reagan, because this is not the only time he brings up Reagan. And so I feel like he's trying to be like, you're accusing me of all this stuff, but this isn't what I believe. But yet that's not, he's saying he believes these things, but that's not what he's putting into practice and policy as the governor.
Right. And this is one reason why I don't like the whole Reagan worship of the Republican Party, where they just have, cutouts of Reagan everywhere. And everyone says, oh, I have to go back to when everything was like Reagan. Because the left then uses it as a weapon, basically saying like, well, Ronald Reagan believed in this stuff and you have Ronald Reagan up there with Jesus Christ. So why don't you agree with Reagan? You love Reagan.
Right.
And if you go through his presidency, there's probably a lot people would disagree with when it comes to Reagan. And yeah, he mentions it a lot throughout this. That's his whole tactic is like, well, Sean, Ronald Reagan said this and you love Ronald Reagan. But you don't have to love everything a president does. But it's interesting that he sounds so tough on immigration. I think that's also, Democrats are also feeling the heat on immigration a little bit more. I think they're starting to see a lot more Hispanics kind of move over to the Republican side, and immigration is probably something that's driving it, from Florida to Texas to a lot of places. So I think they're probably starting to see the pressure from that. The numbers and the focus groups are saying we need to get a little tougher on immigration. We can't just have a open border. So,
right. And so he's going to have to start to move towards the middle of that if he wants to run for president. So this is like a pre-campaign. We'll see what I said here. I told you all on Fox News.
So it'd be interesting in a hypothetical presidential candidacy of Gavin Newsom. He just said he supports the 650 miles of wall that is on California's border because he governs a border state. Does that now mean, does he translate that into a general election and say it works in California, the wall, so let's build it the rest of the country and finish the wall?
I won't be surprised.
Is Gavin Newsom going to advocate to build the wall if he runs for president? That would be
that would be fascinating. And then I would love to see how they would flip this of like, well, no, when I said this, this is what I meant. And when Trump said it, that's what he, like.
I said it because I want to protect the country and do it correctly. But when Trump said it, it's because he hates Mexicans.
Yes, he's racist. So
exactly. Build the wall. Gavin Newsom, 2024, build the wall. Finish the wall.
Already, we prioritize.
You're going to give a free college education and $2.7 billion of taxpayer dollars in California to Medi-Cal. And that's for illegal immigrants only.
And we're spending the money already. I know everybody on the right can't stand sanctuary policy.
Okay, so I looked this up. This is going to be the first fact check of this episode. This is from Cal Matters. California is expanding Medi-Cal, but hundreds of thousands of immigrants will still be left behind. Let's see. Expansion would still leave several 100,000 undocumented immigrants, like Mariquin, it's the person they mentioned, uninsured. They're unable to qualify because they have jobs where they earn above Medi-Cal's annual income thresholds for most adults. 17,000 for single people, 23,000 for a couple, and 36,000 for a family of four. That leaves many low-income immigrants with a few viable options for health coverage, while most Californians who earn over the Medi-Cal limit can get subsidized coverage. Through Cover California, undocumented people are not allowed to buy insurance through the marketplace under the Federal Affordable Care Act. In 2023, after Medi-Cal expands to cover undocumented immigrants 50 and older, about 3.2 million people will remain uninsured in California, according to researchers at UC Berkeley. Of those, 1.16 million will be unauthorized immigrants. That's a new term, unauthorized immigrants. Even if Newsom's next step is approved, covering undocumented adults 26 to 49 as early as 2024, that would still leave roughly 450,000 undocumented people under 65 with no health coverage. So, just to kind of make a comment on he likes to pat himself on the back for this, but it's not being fully implemented. So, in terms of if you're going to take a victory lap on it, it's not quite the victory, and hundreds of thousands of undocumented immigrants are not going to be able to get access to it anyway. So what are we spending the money on?
They're sitting in accounts. Like I read another article and they authorize a certain amount of funds at a time, but the funds are sitting there. So in 2020, I want to say they released some of the funds, and so it helped X amount of people. Now it's kind of like I guess next year they're going to release funds, or maybe it's this year. I don't know how it works. It makes no sense to me.
But it does look like it's not going to the people that he's purporting it to go to. So,
right. Or at least not as many, or
not as
soon
many,
enough.
Yeah. But also to the point that the right likes to make it seem like it's going to be just every undocumented immigrant is going to get free healthcare just for walking across the border. But it has to meet certain poverty lines and certain incomes. So, not a roaring success.
Understand that Rudy Giuliani, by the way, Trump's old attorney, was a huge proponent of sanctuary policy.
I didn't know that.
Actually said it keeps you healthier, safer, and more educated. Actually made those arguments when he was governor, or rather mayor of New York. It's the cards that are dealt in the absence of comprehensive reform. I'm all for comprehensive reform. I'm for background checks. I'm for addressing border security in all its forms and manifestations, not just walls. I'm addressing a legal pathway. I'm actually wanting to address all these issues, but I want to do it.
He's for border security in all forms and safety. Is that like a pro-police statement?
Is that a pro-law enforcement statement?
Yeah.
Interesting.
More guns?
So are we pro-law enforcement and border patrol and the wall? Wow.
This is getting suspicious.
It's almost like it's time to hand Gavin a red hat.
It in a rational way and not just bastardize the conversation as exclusively about the border.
Okay, I have here in my pile of stuff the exact federal law that prohibits. Now, there are two court decisions that you might be able to cite. One is the Trump lawsuit. That was in the Ninth Circuit. The other is some wording and one opinion that Justice Scalia gave some years back. But it is unambiguous when you read the 18 U.S. Code as it relates to entering the country that you've got to do so legally. By characterizing the state as sanctuary, aren't you thereby violating federal law, the laws that are on the books, and that our own Constitution states very unequivocally that, in fact, you should be following?
These sanctuary policies have been on the books for decades. Cities, Democratic cities, Republican-led cities in the past, Democratic states, clearly, more modern conception around dealing with reality, the cards that are dealt. Right. You want people that are victims of crime to come forward and report those crimes. That's the purpose of sanctuary. You want
people who are guilty of crimes to come forward and report those crimes, or victims of crime to report those crimes.
I don't know what he said because I'm kind of stuck on the fact that he doesn't actually ever answer the question. He just spins it.
It's in the Constitution. Quick constitutional lesson. There is a clause called the preemption clause, meaning, or the supremacy clause, meaning that anything the federal government does can preempt anything states do. That's the idea of, comes from the idea of the sovereign and the king, and basically that the federal government can preempt and is supremacy over everything. So I think that's what Sean Hannity was trying to ask, which is that the Constitution has this supremacy clause. If there's federal law and the Constitution clearly gives the federal government control over immigration, not the states. So if states thumb their nose at laws that are created by the federal government, they would be in violation of federal law. And there's really no legal argument that states can make because they're subordinate to the federal government. That was a little free constitutional advice, or a quick little constitutional lesson, and I didn't even charge anybody for it.
Yes.
So that's what I think. And he's not he's you're right. He's being a little Weasley on this because he's not really answering whether they're in violation. He's like, oh, they've been on the books forever and blah, 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 blah. Okay, sure. How does he feel about, when states don't listen to federal law and federal nullification? Because that's effectively what this is. That's a different theory, is nullification. Mm-hmm. Thomas Jefferson talked about it. This idea of like the states can nullify actions of the federal government by just not obeying it, even if they're if they're violating federal law. I wonder how he would feel about other nullification processes by other states. Maybe red states nullify and say, we're not listening to the federal government on this issue or that issue. So it does open an interesting legal argument. And he doesn't really answer the question.
Kid be educated that's here regardless of how they got here. You want that kid educated. You want to take care of someone that's an emergency and not have them concerned that they're going to be deported by a nurse. The point is you deal with reality. But look, I stipulate, I'm happy to get rid of those protections by doing the hard work of actually coming together as a nation across our differences and support comprehensive reform and modernize our asylum system and modernize our immigration system. This issue will only get worse. It's not just border issue is the point.
7.5 million people under Joe Biden will illegally enter this country in 3 years of his presidency. Yep. To me, that's unconscionable. That's unfair to the American people. That's unfair to the states, including your state. That's unfair to border states like Texas. But here's where I want to just pause a second and ask you a really serious question. Yeah. I don't think Joe Biden is mentally, physically capable of being the president.
That's a hell of a pivot, Sean. You've been on TV and radio this long, and you went from immigration to I'm going to pivot to the fact that the president of the United States is basically a vegetable. Discuss.
United States. Hang on. I suspect if I took your phone and I took a look at it, not that I believe in privacy, I would never do that. I would bet on a daily basis that there are people urging you to run for president and primary him. Am I wrong in my assumption?
Well, my phone's been lighting up at how well he did with the UK Prime Minister. My phone lit up and how he
that's a nice duck.
McCarthy on the debt ceiling.
Your phone light up?
My phone lights up with Republican friends saying, you know what? Despite all of the rhetoric, these bipartisan bills he keeps passing on infrastructure and the CHIPS and Science Act, the bipartisan work he did on gun legislation reform and around the debt.
Lies. He's saying his Republican friends are saying all this. No, not even your Democrat friends are saying that, buddy.
No, I don't think. I don't think his phone is blowing up with people going, "OMG, did you see what the president did today? Oh my God, that's so great."
We're gonna have to wait till 2028 because Biden is so amazing.
Oh my God, you have no chance at all.
Debt ceiling make me feel maybe he's done a little bit better job than some.
But that wasn't my question. Does your phone light up with Gavin? You need to get in this primary. He's not able to run. He's not up to the job.
Look, everybody has their quiet chatter, and everybody's out there rooting for America. I'm rooting for our president. I have great confidence in his leadership.
I don't want him to fail.
Been able to accomplish.
I think his policies are failing.
CHIPS Act, Science Act. Do you oppose that?
I will tell you on every measure, from the economy, inflation, borders, energy, national security, he's missing in action.
Let's talk about them in order.
Hang on.
Wait, I want to challenge the premise. You said the economy, 13.1 million jobs he's created. More.
These are post-COVID jobs.
Okay. First, this is second fact check. Okay, let's see. Second fact check. Did Biden actually create more jobs? That's been something that he likes to talk about. Did he create 12 million new jobs? And this is town hall, but they do quote PolitiFact a lot. So if you come at me and say I quoted from town hall, they quote from PolitiFact. It says Biden was inaugurated when the nation recovered from the sudden job losses that stemmed from the government mandated pandemic lockdowns in 2020. The jobs recovery began under former President Donald Trump, but because his tenure ended only 8 months into the economic revival cycle, much of the jobs accrued during Biden's time in office. Quote, this is literally evidence that Biden was handed something on a golden platter. Douglas Holtz-Eakin, head of American Action Forum, a think tank, told PolitiFact this recovery from a deep recession would have happened no matter who was president. Let's see, a proportion of adults who either had a job or were looking for one edged to 62.4% in January, which is below the pre-pandemic level of 63.4%. Meanwhile, most Americans, 60% of them, believe that Biden has not created more good jobs in their communities, published on a Washington Post ABC poll. So, percentage-wise, U.S. jobs under Biden's watch has increased by 8.5% since his presidential term started, which is less than that of former President Barack Obama's first term, 8.6, President Bill Clinton's first term, 10.5, Ronald Reagan, 11.2, President Jimmy Carter, 12.8. Using this metric, PolitiFact measured that Biden's percentage of job gains is also outmatched by former President Nixon, 13.2, Lyndon B. Johnson, 21.3, and Clinton's 21.9. So.
Well, okay. Correct me if I'm wrong. Just a moment ago, Hannity asked him about the border, and Gavin sounded very presidential, saying once he's willing to do the hard work with the nation and come together and do border reform. Then he turns around a moment later to defend Biden on all his policies and how great they're working, including the border.
Mm-hmm.
So Did he just say he believes that the border needs to be reformed, and then he just said Biden's doing fantastic on the border?
Yeah. Yeah. He said there definitely needs to be comprehensive reform. It sounds like there's a lot of work to be done on migration, immigration, and the border. And but also Biden is slaying it. He's just
Right.
absolutely killing it on the border. So